the cyber task force at FBI Boston. I've been an agent since 2002. Worked a variety of different violations in my career. When I was first assigned to the Boston field office, I worked on the computer intrusion squad at that time. We were, as you'd imagine, was a much different look and landscape of what we were investigating back in that time. But it's evolved quite a bit, and also in that past 18 years or so, I've been able to get experience working other violations and kind of back to where I started. I think, for me, when I first got into the FBI, I was an engineer with Sun Microsystems. So I was supported the Solaris platform and did installs for some of their customers in the DC area. When I first got here, it was kind of like the security group was a very respected, backline engineer type of group that handled all the security issues, both with engineering and with support calls. So when I got to the FBI, I didn't really see myself as a security person per se. I was an investigator and I used the technology, but really have come kind of full circle now in understanding both some of the, as a subject matter expert in the cybersecurity world, but also realizing that security is not just dedicated to the backline engineers of the support world. Although we need the kind of the deep dives into security, security is really something that everyone should be talking about. So I understand the audience today is kind of a general, there's a big wide range of individuals with different levels of experience in security. So I think it's an important group to speak to. And I think I'm glad to hear that there's, general users in addition to the security folks out there.
Yeah. And one important thing you left out is that, you graduated from a master's degree program here at Boston College. You're a proud Eagle. And I'll note this too, Doug's pretty humble. Doug was the graduate student of the year, and he received that honor this year. And there you go.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it was an excellent experience. And I can't, our director just, he kind of revisited and spoke to the workforce about the different pillars of our organization. And one of those pillars is the partnerships. And I couldn't be more proud of our partnership with BC and specifically with the cybersecurity program. And I'm happy to kind of lend a hand and help do the outreach when we can. So appreciate you having me again.
Perfect. Just like I wrote it, Doug. Just like I wrote it.
That's right.
Hey, all right. Thanks for your background. And, really, if you could define, really what the FBI's role is in cybersecurity. What do they do and who do they work with and how do they do that?
Sure. So it has evolved. I would say that, the mission of the cyber division is to impose consequences on our adversaries. That means different things for different people, for different organizations. For us right now at the Cyber Task Force in Boston, and this is kind of similar in most of the FBI field offices, we've got a national security squad as well as a criminal squad of cyber investigators that are investigating computer intrusion cases specifically. The role of the FBI is to conduct a criminal investigation on the adversary, and sometimes we're starting at the victim endpoint. Other times we get information about a subject and we're able to begin an investigation with the subject or a suspect in mind. But for us specifically on the criminal squad, our cases should lead to indictments. Our national security squad is they have a little bit of a different mission there, was that in that their investigations tend to be a little bit longer, but in an ideal world they also move eventually to an indictment. Recently in July there were the two Chinese hackers that were indicted. They're residents of China. That was a 10-year investigation that had targeted 3 Massachusetts organizations here. In that case was a long case, but they and they're not domestic here. So they're that indictment kind of shows that we both have the same goal, but sometimes the way that we get to them might be different paths.
Okay, and Doug, you mentioned you're working with your task. But do you work with the state and the local governments as well here in Boston?
Absolutely. The FBI's, as I said, the partnerships are huge, both in the private sector and in law enforcement. On our task force, we've got some federal partners with Department of Education, OIG, and the IRS. But we've also got a New Hampshire state trooper, and we work very closely with the Massachusetts State Police. We couldn't do our job. I think this is true for every squad in the FBI. We couldn't do our job without the cooperation from state and local police. So specific to cyber, they're a huge part of what we do. And, I can't thank them enough because I think they're always very responsive and willing to help us out. So. It's not like the movies, Kevin. It's not like, we're walking into a crime scene and we tell anyone to leave. The more the merrier is our kind of motto here in Boston, at least.
Good to know. All right, Doug. When we look at COVID-19, you look at some of the headlines, and I have a bunch of stats, and I know you have some too from the FBI, but this one's glaring here is, COVID-19 is blamed for 238% surge in cyber attacks against banks. Okay. If you could, thinking where we are now, what is the biggest threat out there right now, not only to banks, but to any institution, entity, or government on the cyber side?
So the short answer is ransomware. I think ransomware is the biggest threat right now to organizations and in our area of responsibility. But you mentioned that it's cyber, that stat said cyber attacks, and I kind of want to peel that back a little bit because in our line of work, even though we refer to our squad as the cyber task force, if you're in this kind of industry or you understand cybersecurity, you'll also realize that a computer intrusion event is much different than an email spoofed phishing message. So some of the stats and some of the way that we organize things in today's organizations or vernacular is using the term cyber, which is really kind of all encompassing in that term. I've been pushing the agents on our squad to use the term computer intrusion with everything we do because if someone's if they're copying a domain, maybe kevinpowers.com is taken. So I want to create a kevinpowers123.com and make it and act like I am the Kevin Powers organization. That type of spoofing is treated much differently by the letter of the law than say if I gain access to the Kevin Powers domain and am able to use it maliciously. So those kind of nuances are important, I think, to recognize, particularly for the people viewing, because an incident that might deal with a fraud or a spoofing matter is much different than us being able to charge someone with unauthorized access to a network.
No, and that's good to recognize the difference between cybersecurity and computer intrusion. I can tell you right now, though, I'm not going to change the name of the master's degree to a master's in computer intrusion and policy. It's not going to sell as much. Hey, you mentioned ransomware. There's going to be some folks on here who don't know what ransomware. Could you briefly, define what it is and what it does, and what it does to companies? What's the real threat about it?
Sure. So a ransomware attack would involve a deployment of malware that allows the controller of that malware to encrypt information that is stored within a network. And in doing so, the network administrators are unable to read that information, and the users are notified that they'll have to pay a ransom in order to get that data decrypted. It's a huge problem because, as we all know, the encryption works. There's no shortcut around encryption, and unless you're able to get a decryption key by some other means, you're left with three options really when you're attacked. The first would be to, am I getting ahead, Kevin? I apologize if I am.
No, this is great.
Okay, cool. So the three options, if you were infected with ransomware, your options are to restore from a backup that hasn't been touched, and we encourage backups to be maintained offline so that they're not infected or affected by the ransom, by the encryption. The second would be to restore from scratch and have to rebuild your system from the ground up. And the third option is to pay the ransom. We've seen where there's ransoms paid by victims who, once they obtain their data again, their data is corrupted despite the fact that they paid and did everything that was asked by the subject. There's nothing that can happen, and they have to resort to the last option, which is rebuilding. So we always encourage victims not to pay the ransom, but we also understand that's a kind of a decision that should be made with the stakeholders of the company and or the organization that have that are kind of facing the implications of the alternative.
And a part of that too is that the FBI's position is one, you can pay the ransom, you might not get what you had back. One, two, if you do, it might be infected with even more malware, and three, you don't know who you're paying. It could be going to a terrorist organization or whoever.
Absolutely, yep. There's significant restrictions on money being transferred to certain countries, and it could cause additional problems down the road if that's not, at least should be considered in the decision-making process.
Okay, and how do they get in the systems? I know one of the big threats here, with the move home, it's really phishing. Can you talk about phishing and spear phishing and what the threats are you're seeing right now?
Sure. So phishing is overwhelmingly the most effective technique for that attack vector into an organization. I will say too, we've learned and been briefing that a lot of the initial intrusion into a ransomware target is oftentimes the RDP accounts and ports that are scanned and then brute forced with passwords. Victims I've spoken to have told me that there's an RDP account that all of the RDP users are able to access. Most of it is like a team that's working from home now, and they're all using the RDP sessions to get back into a server to access something that they'll need for work. So lock down the RDP passwords. Keep those ports closed unless you actually need to RDP back in. And other than that known issue that we've been hearing about recently is, like you said, phishing. Phishing right now is, the theme of phishing is COVID-19 and work from home, and the opportunities for as far as school communications, be it higher education or the elementary school. There's a lot of people starting to panic, including I wouldn't say I'm panicked, but I'm starting to realize what this fall is going to look like. And I think you're eager to kind of get that information and access it. Have you not had that phishing thought in the back of your mind? I would imagine that recipients of those emails are a little bit click happy to get that information.
Yeah, and to back that up, I have some stats here. One is ransomware accounts for a third, if not more, of all cyber attacks. I have here too that ransomware attackers capitalized on the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic, bumping the average enterprise ransom payment in Q1 to $111,000, a 33% spike in the cost for ransomware. That's just to get your stuff back.
Yes. Yeah, and it's become, instead of kind of negotiating with the attacker, it's becoming much more professionalized in that the victim doesn't necessarily have a dialogue with the attacker like it used to be, 2 or 3 years ago. There's, websites set up that the victim will have to access, drop in their victim ID number and pay the ransom. And it's kind of an automated process. There's no, negotiation that takes place anymore.
Right. And the attackers, who are they out there right now? Who are you seeing? Is it criminals? Is it activists? Is it nation state? Or is it all of the above?
It's all of the above. Obviously the nation state problem is going to be a little bit more, want to be a little bit more under the radar. But it's but the ransomware is going to be, from any level of sophistication, it's going to impose a problem for a victim. And if that's what your goal is and your agenda is, maybe it wouldn't be your end game, but maybe a kind of a piece of the puzzle for what you're trying to accomplish. Ransomware is definitely going to be a problem. And, the research companies are pretty good about pushing out indicators and, things to look for in your network that are indicators of that ransomware. Because these ransomware attacks are multi-stage. So once that malware gets dropped, there's a series of depending on the variant, there's a series of steps that need to take place before your data is able to be encrypted. So keying in on what those initial indicators are is extremely important. There's a handful of times that we are notified by other investigators that they might have they might have visibility into something that a victim should know about, or that some of those indicators that they see, we're able to make that notification early, which is great. But that's kind of the exception to the rule. So understanding your network, if there's if someone's accountable, or that there's network admins here, they would understand the term threat hunting and what that means for that organization to be able to look for and detect that activity in their network before it's actually deployed.
Excellent. And Doug, one of the things out there too is, I'll just define, because I talked about criminals, hacktivists, and nation states. So criminal, that's, think of your criminals who they just want your money, right? They're bad actors. The hacktivists, they're trying to send a message. They're activists, and they're going to target a certain company or a government and try to shut down their systems to send a message, some sort of political message. They'll take your money, don't get me wrong, but that's what their goal is. And then we have the nation states, and we can talk further about the cyber espionage out there, but that would be one of the biggest threats is China, where they're going after companies and they're going after intellectual property, right? So is that, you'd agree with those definitions?
Sure.
And one piece on this too with the ransomware is it's pretty easy to get, right? It's being sold on the dark web as ransomware as a service, right? So it's really, if someone wants to get it and they want to target you, they could do it, right?
Sure. Yeah, like a lot of these vulnerabilities, I mean, there's exceptions to some of the zero-day exploits out there, but this malware is it's open source. You can review it, you can see what it looks like. There's something I had kind of thought up regarding the ransomware and how it kind of stacks in the spectrum over the past decade or so of what the trends we've seen. Ransomware now being the biggest problem, and what was once an extraordinary technique in ransomware now is impacting regular and everyday people, right? Such as us. Just like the DDoS attacks had years back, where you can essentially now go on to a website to purchase a DDoS and target a specific IP or target. We see a lot of the gamer communities that are a little bit more vicious towards each other. They'll DDoS each other. I find that these types of techniques that are extremely they're kind of packaged together so that it's a much easier infection and attack than what the ransomware subjects were doing 5 years ago. So
Yeah, and recently too, I read a report where not only asking for the money, well, they're not asking, they give me the money if you want your information, but they're also, taking your personal data now and publishing it, saying, hey, if you don't play the game now, if you don't give us the money within 24 hours, they can start posting personal sensitive emails where they're going after like board members, the C-suite and others. They're not only there just to get them, now they're going to just start embarrassing people as well if they can.
Yeah, I mean they're twisting the knife, while they're trying to possibly disrupt the victim. Now they're starting to make it more painful for that victim to compel them to pay that ransom, which are getting to be higher, as you mentioned, because now the implications and these types of issues are coming up with regards to exposing what information was taken, that negotiation, and there's data brokers out there that'll, they don't care about infecting anyone or breaching anything, but once they get the data, now they're going to broker a deal with criminals that want to buy it, and maybe the victim will pay more than what the criminal is paying. So there's all sorts of these tiers and different services and roles out there.
Yeah, and Doug, I'm just going to jump in, and you and I were just throwing out phishing and spear phishing. We got to assume some of the folks in the audience don't know what that means. So phishing email, that's pretty much, that's the broad shot, right? Where there's a link in an email that's coming from, could be, like you said, Kevin Powers or DougDomin.com. You don't know who it is, and it could be offering, whatever, free tickets or things along those lines, and someone clicks on it, and that's, the malware that comes in. It's a broad shoot. Spear phishing is more along the lines of the social engineering. I look and I target, I'm the bad actor. I target your executive assistant. I, follow him on Facebook. I see him on LinkedIn. I then send an email that looks like yours to him and ask him to wire me or wire a bank account to pay off a certain bill. And he does that assuming it's you. And what happened was he was socially engineered. Is that a good?
Exactly. And the reconnaissance phase of that attack, can be, days, months, or years, depending on who they're going after and how sophisticated of a spearfish that's going to be. So
right. That's what they call it, the whaling, which is really just a spear phishing, and you're going after, like the chairman of the board or the CEO or the COO.
Right.
Excellent. So Doug, okay, so now we'll jump into, boy, this is moving quick as usual when we start talking. All right, do you have any examples of cases you worked on, regarding ransomware and how, some good success stories there?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have specific stories about ransomware. There's, we can talk about cases once they're adjudicated, and so we're unable to talk about anything that's going on. And sometimes these are year-long investigations. But what I can do is maybe describe a little bit about, how the FBI has organized the ransomware investigations, because I think it would be helpful for to kind of justify why you would reach out to the FBI if you were impacted by ransomware. Let me start. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's good, because I could maybe we can go on to this and like kind of walk through it. So I'm representing a company, and I'm outside counsel. We suffer a breach, it's ransomware, and I call the FBI. What should I expect?
Yeah. So if you call me, what you'll expect is we'll get
either hang up.
No, we'll get on a phone call. With generally there's two agents that are on the phone call. We'll ask that whoever, all the decision makers, or we can kind of phase in those folks that need to be privy to the call. But essentially, what we want to do is figure out if this is going to be a case that first of all meets the federal threshold for prosecution, because ultimately we'll have to get prosecutors involved to issue legal process. But what I want to offer, and I think what should happen is a brief phone call to kind of understand what's going on at the victim organization, and to get an initial set of indicators that are, were discovered by either the victim, or if there was an incident responder that came in that was able to kind of detect and start to mitigate the problem. What that initial what that initial indicators look like. We can, we're able to, through an authority, preserve records at a provider, for instance, which doesn't give us any access to information. It just notifies the provider to put things on hold, to preserve that information for us to start to, get our report, our initial report, and our case opening done, so that we can then go back with the proper legal process and obtain it. So having those indicators early is very important. We can also kind of discuss if there's any kind of notification or publicity that's going to have to be done on behalf of the victim and their customers or clients if there was a data breach. We can kind of talk through a lot of those issues on the phone, and maybe even offer some pointers. I mean, the victims, if there's individuals on this call, that I think that's a huge step in the right direction. As you'd imagine, there's a lot of victims that really don't know where to begin. They don't understand. They need to notify the victims that might have had PII exposed, for instance. And so we oftentimes walk and kind of step through some of these issues. We provide some resources, many of which I've learned from the degree program, quite honestly. And we're able to just kind of help them stop the bleeding at first. Our mission really is to make sure the victim is able to mitigate the threat before we bring in any kind of investigative resources to the problem. Because what will happen when the FBI does get involved, we hang the phone up, we start to open up a case. Our first email back is going to ask for a laundry list of things that we'll need as evidence. If there's a memory captures that were done on the patient zero machine, for instance, if we'll need to grab any forensic evidence, log files, emails that were obtained. An email is a great piece of evidence. But what we have to have from the email is the header section. And if you just forward us an email, it's not going to contain any of the source IP addresses or how it was routed. So understanding, can I give this email to the FBI? How do I do it? Is something that, companies and organizations can work through in a tabletop before ever, having to experience something like that. So, so it's important to know if, that we're not going to show up lights and sirens outside the physical building. It can be handled over the phone and remotely initially, and because we are in the field and this is our area of responsibility. If there is a need for kind of a personal connection and a personal visit, we certainly would make that too. We don't want to overburden the victim at their most kind of vulnerable time. So a lot of this is kind of established on that initial phone call.
Yeah, and that's a good point. The FBI's view, this is a victim. That when you look at the company or whoever is suffering the breach, they're a victim here. And I guess, and I think you addressed this when you said it depends, right? Like, so I'm sure there's different tiers. Like, it's more, the bigger the breach, the more likelihood the FBI is going to get involved, or the resources are going to go in to the investigation. Is that how it works?
It does. It kind of is it's kind of a binary thing. It's either we're going to open it and we're going to work this as an investigation, and it's going to be supported by our prosecutors, or it doesn't meet the threshold of a federal crime. We may not have the resources available to investigate it at that time, and we can defer or to another organization or to another field office. So once that case is opened, it will not be closed until there is a logical conclusion, whether it's there's no further leads of value, or we've identified a IP block and we can't get further, or we know who this is based on social media and other things that we've been able to put together. So it's a our cases, we don't necessarily rank or prioritize them on the squad by the financial loss. It's kind of how big of a problem do we need to solve? The end result and the victim is always forefront in our mind as far as what finding a resolution for that victim.
Yeah, and a piece of that is preaching this out there, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here. It's important for anyone who suffers a breach, no matter how small, to report it to you. And this goes to kind of the information sharing that you collect. You get to see trends out there of the bad actors, who they're targeting, what they're using, more importantly, so you can help and get the word out there to stop it.
For sure. And we have, the analysts on the squad that are embedded, who are always kind of looking at that larger landscape, looking at, what are the types of questions we should be asking victims and asking the private industry. Our IC3.gov portal has been a really great way to capture a lot of that information. We were just notified of like the year's the 6 month for 2020 at the end of June was showed that there was double the amount of IC3 reports than there had been the 6 month period prior. So I know that the word is out there, which is great. And IC3.gov is a good resource. Sometimes you don't want to use, call or bother someone on the phone or with an email, but you might have observed something or seen something on a network, or even in the physical world when we are able to get back out there, and you want to report it and just kind of have peace of mind that it's been done. So IC3.gov is an excellent resource for that, and in looking at that bigger picture and the trends, throughout the years.
All right, Doug, you talked about what you do. Why don't you make it clear to everyone what you don't do if I call and I suffer a breach?
Sure. So, like I said, we don't show up with our lights and sirens going outside the building. I have worked in investigation where it was in another country where the responding officer put yellow tape around the server. We don't do that either. What we want to do is, like I said, help the victim to really stop the bleeding, figure out what the next logical steps are for the victim, but also find those indicators that we're going to need to act on right away. We also don't, in our investigations, some of the concern we have is as far as compliance issues or regulatory issues that the victim might have to comply with. Although they're important, those aren't decisions that we would necessarily be involved in with the victim. Those are things that compliance issue is something they need to deal with their counsel and figure that out.
Yeah, and it's important for everyone to understand that when you come in, you're not coming in there to fix everything and get all the computers set up and up and running. You're conducting an investigation.
Exactly. And we, from the edge of the network, from the edge of the victim's network, outwards to the rest of the world is kind of where we're gonna be conducting that investigation. From the edge looking internally, that's really going to be the victim's responsibility, and we do not jump on the keyboard and conduct any kind of run any kind of tools unless it's something that's requested or required in the investigation, and those are well thought through and discussed processes.
No, that's perfect. All right, Doug, I'm going to shift gears here, and right now we have about 20 minutes left, and we got a lot of questions coming in.
Cool.
What I'm thinking, before we take their questions, is there anything you want to address right now before we start taking everyone's questions? There's a bunch out there, and they're all pretty good.
Okay, great. Nothing particular except the fact that that IC3.gov portal is an excellent resource. I would also encourage viewers to look at idtheft.gov. Idtheft.gov is a great has a lot of great information for victims of identity theft. Looking at that page once you're compromised is not a great feeling, because it's all the things you should have done before you were your data was exposed. So having an idea of what idtheft.gov offers and the information on there is pretty important, because we're, from an individual level, we will not get involved in many investigations that where one person's identity was impacted. Our investigations, they have to meet a certain threshold, and so in a lot of these people that I speak with, I hate to say it, but you kind of have to learn to protect yourself, and you can't rely on the FBI to come protect you or deal with the problem after the fact. So soaking that all up, understanding how to protect yourself personally, I think is really important.
Yeah, and we're going to go through. So what we went through so far, just to recap, is one, what the FBI does, what's their role, what they can do to help you, what are the current threats, really focusing on ransomware, phishing, spear phishing, and then really looking at, what happens if there's a breach, with the FBI's role and how they play out. And one piece before I go to the questions, and really the questions coming in are really like, great, thanks for scaring us. How do we address this? And I think, we have that all set up, and we'll just go through the questions to address that. But one piece, Doug, and I think this is important, we talked about this, is really the relationship with the regulators. If I'm outside counsel for a company, I'm dealing with you. Do you deal at all? I know the answer, but many here won't, with the regulators, meaning, whether it's federal or state regulators who are looking at the company now more as they're a defendant, because they had the personally identifiable information or sensitive information, and they suffered a breach. Can you speak to that?
Sure. So here locally in Boston, we have very limited interaction with the SEC, for instance. If there was there are certainly scenarios in which they may become interested and get involved in a breach. Again, like you said, looking at what we refer to as the victim is now the defendant.
Right.
We understand the sensitivities there. It's not a proactive relationship that we share with them currently. And in an investigation, there's a precedent for that on our market and securities fraud squad, who deal with the SEC quite a bit on securities that that are pump and dump schemes and that sort of thing. In the cyber security squads and in our cases, very limited contact, and it should not be a reason why we are not contacted. We'll be very transparent with our process, and we can even have a conversation to determine if it's going to be the right direction or not. So I don't want that to be a mitigate or a factor of why you would not reach out for us.
Yeah, and that's something really important, because a lot of folks look at government as government, right? They don't differentiate. So if there's any information you're getting, are you sharing that with the regulators?
No. I like I said, I've not worked my cases that I've had, and there have been some pretty significant breaches that the victims have suffered. There's not been any kind of exchange of information with the regulators. Now, certainly I could be legally compelled to provide that, and we would not hold that back. But that's not happened, and I would encourage the people on the call to understand what we're going to look for is what we refer to as bad guy data. We're not going to come to ask for a list of customers. We're not going to come to ask for PII of any employees without the proper legal process. We're going to ask initially for bad guy information. So one of the good conversations that everyone could have tomorrow or as soon as possible is with the general counsel of the organization. Ask them, what's the threshold? Can we provide an IP address of an attacker to the FBI? Because for the FBI, that's a really big that's a big win for us, because then we can kind of open or initiate an investigation based on that information that's provided to us. It may be worthless to the victim. They may not. It may not be a big lift, and but it could help us down the road. So,
excellent. Thanks, Doug. All right, so I'm going to go to the questions. We have a slew of them, so we'll address them by one. All right, some of these here we've already hit upon. All right, there's a question here dealing with mitigation. It talks about like, hey, we're a small business. You mentioned, here it is. Yeah, okay. I'll just summarize that question in a way. The question, to both of us is, hey, I'm a mid-sized firm. Ransomware is coming at me. What can I do to protect myself?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Doug? I have some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll let you give your thoughts first.
Well, if there was a specific software or feature that we could enable, I think that we could share, I would definitely do that, and would be, you'd probably be very wealthy. I think what's very important for organizations to understand is to really start to kind of categorize the information at your company. Figure out what are the key assets, what are the things that we cannot operate without, and start to defend that wholeheartedly before anything else. If ransomware is going to impact an organization, they need, if they have an offline backup of their key assets, they're going to be able to recover and respond to it within 24
Mm-hmm.
hours. They have to make sure that they've tested the backup, and they have to make sure that the backup is not in the cloud or accessible from that network that's being infected by ransomware. So as a mid-level organization, defining what your key assets are, creating an offline backup and a backup schedule, testing the backup regularly is the first and foremost thing that I would be doing.
Yeah, and my advice on that too, really, it comes down to your employees. There's simple ways to handle this. You're not going to buy yourself out of it, right? With technology, you're just not. It really comes down to a cyber culture, and that comes from the top on down. You need buy-in at the top, where the individuals look and say, like, geez, we're all in this together. Especially now in COVID-19, everyone's in a remote office, right? Doug and I, we're in dorm rooms. Everyone else is working from home. And when you think of when you're working from home, it sounds nice, but most people aren't in an office. Most people are at a kitchen table. Most people have 2, 3, 4 kids running around. They're sharing the Wi-Fi. They're sharing potentially personal computers. They're sharing the same printers. And there's a lot going on there. And it comes down to, like, how do you protect all of that? Some easy tidbits here is just putting together a list of frequently asked questions, right? Like, what's PII? What does that really mean? Hey, is my Wi-Fi secure? How do I secure my Wi-Fi? What's a step-by-step process to install malware protection, right? Can I use Wi-Fi, at Starbucks? The answer is no. But then tell them why they can't do that. Tell them what a VPN is. Yeah, jump in, Doug.
I was going to say another one is the social media policy. If you, there have been several instances of employees who have posted to social media with pictures of their company information in the background that is now visible. So what are going to be the ramifications for an employee who does something like that?
Yeah, what's IoT? What's an IoT device? What is that? How do I secure that? Am I actually using it? Am I responsible for private information when I'm at home? Who has access to that, and how do I share that? That's one easy step. Another is training your employees. Really making them aware. We train them on everything. Security needs to be part of that as well, as specifically cybersecurity. And for low money, if you train your force up, on what phishing is, what spear phishing is, how you protect, and then you have a consequence to it if they don't, just like anything else. If someone doesn't secure the files and you're in a law firm, that person usually gets in trouble. It should be the same with cybersecurity as well. So those are great mitigating practices. Another piece too for the mid-sized company, I get some stats here. It's like 2 out of 3 hacks that come in are usually from the supply chain. That's where a third party that you use, whether it's a cloud service provider or whoever you're using, it could be the accountant, it could be the law firm, whoever, the malware is coming in there. You're going to make sure they're trained up too, and they believe in a safe cyber culture as well. Because if they don't, everything you do could be for naught.
Right.
What do you think, Doug?
Yeah, no question. I mean, the problem is, devices. It's always been an issue is having, they call it shadow technology, where it's technology that's being used by the employees that may not be inventoried at the organization, which means that the IT group is unable to secure it and include that as part of their enterprise protection. So while at home, employees may be, it may be a little bit easier to, log in from a personal device to check email on a device that's maybe not protected. So that stuff definitely gets, the effects are going to be, bad. And now that we're, isolated and in these, in our homes, as you'd mentioned, with a lot of other things going on, we may not be focused on the work like we had been when we were, working in an office and had a little bit more space and solitude to get that work done.
Right. And so I have another question here for you, Doug. You mentioned indicators for ransomware. Can you give us examples of what to look for?
Sure. So the ransom note that's provided that was received by the victim, any kind of Bitcoin address or virtual currency that they're asking to be that they're asking the money to be sent to. Email addresses, any domains, those are all, every victim was going to have those, and they're going to be understand what they are. Sometimes there's the malware that initially infects the network is detected, and it's quarantined. So if we had a machine that the victim organization is able to take out of production quickly, and leave it isolated from the rest of the network, that's something that's very good evidence for us to have a copy of the malware and capture the memory on that machine. We refer to that as patient zero of the network. It's going to be the first machine that was infected. That's something that is excellent evidence for us to have. It tells a lot about where the malware comes from, it gives us signatures of the malware, and it helps us to do a little bit more of a threat hunting investigation, out in, in those other, the other portals we've got access to and the other repositories of information that are out there.
All right, Doug, have another question that you can hit out of the park, I have no doubt. China and Russia have been highly active in IP theft and election influence. How dangerous are these state actors to U.S. businesses?
Well, it's a little bit out of my lane, and I'm not well prepared to answer it, because I would want to make sure that that's an accurate response. I mean, anyone can open the paper and see that there is a.
Do you want me to answer that for you, Doug?
Please. It would actually be good for you.
Yeah, I don't want to put you. So on this one, I'll just go by what Assistant Attorney General John Demers said at the last Boston Conference on Cybersecurity, and when he spoke at Boston College Law School in one of our classes, he talked about the China initiative, and what he said, it's very dangerous right now. There's a focused, concerted effort over, and they called it the China initiative. And the reason was, and they showed us this pie chart, it was 98% of the attacks were coming from China, focused on U.S. businesses to steal intellectual property, and two, focused on academia as well to steal the research. And right now with COVID-19, there's been, not only from Russia, but primarily China going after the intellectual property and trying to find these vaccines. I don't work for the government, so I'm just saying what I heard when I interviewed the Assistant Attorney General. Yeah. All right, let me get to the
I just want to, while you're looking at that, Kevin, I'll just point out that the CIA triad of security, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. I think when you're learning about those different aspects of security, for me, the integrity always seemed like a kind of a weak attack, to very overestimated as far as an attack goes. But when you look at integrity of information now, and what I see just in the zeitgeist of today with regards to social media, understanding the sources of information and verifying the integrity of information is almost becoming as important and the most important thing, because we're relying on some of these sources for information, whether it's about the quarantine, the other issues that we've seen this year. I find the integrity to be a really important issue. I know we've addressed it in the classes with regards to the deep fakes technology, et cetera. But you had mentioned the election and the China and Russia attacks, and I think, as I mentioned, those types of techniques are now being used by everyday people. So that's the attacks are not necessarily just the cyber and the computer intrusion attacks. It kind of runs the gamut for what's thereafter.
Yeah, some of the questions we just got, Doug, were on HIPAA protected material, so healthcare sensitive information, and you can see with COVID-19 where they're going with that, but it was more focused on, do you see an uptick on the level of attacks going at the hospitals right now, or the healthcare providers, or has that been pretty much staying level?
No, there's been a huge focus on healthcare. Web commerce and the providers are the highest category of victim in the past 6 months that we've seen. So healthcare is a close second, and for obvious reasons, most of which is that information, medical information, is the most valuable, or at least the subjects believe that to be the most valuable, to sell again. So there's absolutely a big problem. And I think I read stat in your paperwork, Kevin, that said something like 60% or 70% of emails regarding COVID-19 are actually fraud emails.
50%, yep.
50%.
Yeah, I sent those over to you. Yeah, it's 50% of them are fraud emails. From malicious domains. I'm looking at that now. On the HIPAA one too, there's a question like, what would be the best framework, or there's a policy out there. I mean, that's beyond our scope, but one of the frameworks out there that the federal government, has put forth is the NIST framework. And that's a good one to follow. Would you agree, Doug, with that?
As far as HIPAA?
Yeah, for healthcare, in a general sense, protecting data, the NIST framework.
The NIST framework. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. NIST framework is it's pretty accessible. There's a lot of frameworks out there, and I've kind of have a generalist when it comes to this, but the NIST framework is, I think, the most accessible. It's well documented. It's kind of an easy way to jump into a framework if you're looking for something to kind of implement into your security program.
Yeah, so the last question I have here, it's from Elizabeth O'Sullivan. I'm throwing her name out there. Liz O'Sullivan, she's over in Belfast, Ireland. She's our new Fulbright scholar, and she's the CISO for Allstate Insurance. So it got to be pretty late over in Ireland right now. So Liz, is a great question. What is the appropriate response for an enterprise phishing training repeat offender? Some research suggests that punishment can create tension and distrust between the employees and the security team. Doug, I'll answer that question. My thoughts on that. These are my, Professor Powers thoughts. I think when you look at the repeat offender, you have to look at if it's, is it negligence, or is it just totally disregarding the email? You have to look at each. So it has to come back to what type of training are you offering? Is the training providing that individual with the resources and the tools to understand what is going on with that type of phishing email, whether it's a spear phish or just a general broad one? And then if it continues to happen, you have to take action on that. That just is a dereliction of duty at that point, and some punishment has to come in. you have any thoughts on that, Doug?
No, I would agree with you. And there's, different levels of not passing those phishing tests, whether, you move proactively on an email and forward it to your IT department, or you just ignore it and delete it. Or if you, like you said, click on something and don't report it, the severity is between those three examples, I think is pretty important to recognize.
Yeah, here's another one. Is there anything we got a minute left, so I figured I'd throw this one up. Is there anything in the security marketing hype cycle that makes your job harder?
That's a great question. I've never gotten that question before.
I would say October gets pretty busy for you.
October and is essentially an important is a busy month for us. The marketing, I think, is good because it keeps that conversation going. I think all of us understand it's not one, and I think marketing companies have gotten away of you can buy this one thing and you'll be secure, as well as the fact that there is such thing as being a good victim. When we talk about gathering and obtaining evidence, if a victim does not have any evidence, then we don't have a case to work. So having those companies that are, the security companies that are involved is a huge benefit because they do an investigation. We're able to glean leads off of that investigation. It keeps the conversation going, and I think it's overall a win. And any discussion about security is a good discussion. So I'll leave it there.
Excellent. All right, with that, everyone. First off, Doug, thanks again, for coming on here and doing this fireside chat. We really appreciate it. It's been very informative, and thanks for everything you're doing out there for us, with the FBI, and also as a great ambassador for our program here at Boston College. And next time I see you, I'll get you one of our mugs.
Sounds like a plan.
You probably have a cupboard of them.
We've got a couple in the desks. Yeah. Thank you very much for having me. I'm happy to do these anytime you guys need or want some information and that we can provide, and appreciate you keep asking us to come back. So
yeah, and we should mention too, I should call you Professor Domin too, because Doug's going to be teaching over at Boston College this fall on governance, risk assessment, and compliance with Phil Aldridge.
Yeah, so, it'll be looking forward to the fall. Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, no, thank you, Doug. Hey, thanks everyone for participating. Like I said, we're going to do a series of these webinars probably every other month, and they're going to be focused on cyber and national security. Look forward to seeing everyone soon, and really look forward to seeing everyone, hopefully, knock on wood here, on campus at Boston College. So take care, and have a great evening and stay safe. See you, Doug.